Hello there, and welcome back to a Fantasy Minecraft 101 series episode. It's been quite a while since we did one of these. We've been working on the Fantasy Minecraft guide, but today we're going to talk about all the spell engine spell books that are available in the Fantasy Minecraft mod pack. So this is something that I've done the individual series, and if you've watched any of those, you'll know that I covered the spell book, which I consider to be most associated with the individual classes. However, there's a ton of spell books in this mod pack. So we rebuilt our arena. The last time we built one of these, it didn't end well for us, so we're not going to spawn a boss in here. We'll just use some normal mobs, so hopefully nobody will destroy our walls. And I'm going to briefly talk about and then demonstrate every skill that you can get in this game. So the first thing I think we should do, though, is cover how do you get these skill books that you need from the Spell Engine mod. I do have a little short 1-minute video which covers this. If that's all you're looking for, that's probably your best route of learning that, but we'll cover it here briefly as well. So the Spell Engine mod is probably the easiest way to get spells and abilities in this mod pack. The very first thing you're going to do is find yourself a spellbinding table. You can craft one of these. It uses some diorite, which for some reason in this mod pack I have trouble finding diorite on a consistent basis. But these are very easy to find in villages. Almost every village has some form of spellbinding table. Most villages, I should say. But they're pretty easy to find. The other thing to note is that unlike enchanting, spellbinding tables, you need 18 books to get max level spell books. So enchanting goes up to level 30 and you need 15. Spell casting or spell books go up to level 40. So you need at least 18 bookshelves. So once you have all that set up, it's pretty simple. You just go into the spellbinding table, throw a book into the slot and some lapis into the slot, and then you choose your spell book. And so let's just say we wanted Fire Techniques, which is one of the Spellblades books. It would then, we click on that and it brings us up to the next menu where we can buy our spells. Now you do need enchantment points for these. However, I'm in creative right now, so I can just buy them. But if you're in survival and you are red like this, all you need to do is just get some more enchantment points, enchantment levels, and it's pretty easy to do that in this mod pack by just completing quests. So you can get this book pretty early on in the game as long as you get to a village and complete some of the very early on quests and at least get yourself some kind of spell to get you started for whatever class you like. But the question is, what kind of spell books do you want to use? So I will launch right into this. I expect this is going to take a little bit of time as there's easily 20 or more spell books. I'll put in the chapters below the spell book and you can easily jump around to the specific ones you're looking for. Just a couple of things to point out. I did sort all the spell books into different categories. For the most part, it's based on the mod that they come with. However, some of them, like warrior skills and rogue skills, there's a couple of different mods that have books for those. So I just put those into the same category. As far as equipment, I did craft the appropriate equipment for each category, and that's what we'll use to cast these spells, so we get some kind of, demonstration of what they can do. I'm not using optimal equipment or optimal skill layout. I will respec each time I switch to a major different type. So I'm going to keep probably the same spec for like spell blades and elemental spells, but I will respec to probably the appropriate spec type for each spell book. So when you're looking at them, you'll get a semi-balanced view of what they can and can't do. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So the first spellbook we're going to cover is the Tome of Frost. Tome of Frost is part of the Wizards RPG series, and it's your basic Frost Mage spellbook. There's a bunch of spells in the Tome of Frost. Your first spell is Frost Bolt. Frost Bolt launches a ball of frost which ricochets to different targets, causing spell damage and slowing them. Your next spell is Frost Nova, which then freezes the targets around you for 6 seconds, causing damage and blocking their movement, and also making them more vulnerable to frost magic. The third spell is Ice Barrage, and you shoot a barrage of 8 projectiles in a cone out in front of you, but it's a short-range spell. Then you have Frost Shield, which protects you from projectiles and such, but also slows your movement. And finally, you have Blizzard, which is by far my favorite ability. Channels a rain of frost shards down onto your target, dealing a decent amount of damage. So you'll see a lot of these spells are reminiscent of other games. I think of World of Warcraft a lot when I see spells like Blizzard and things like that. So let's just get some of these spawners going and we'll test out some of the spells. So this is your basic Frostbolt. Then you have your Frost Nova, which as you see freezes them, making that cool kind of blue glowing if it doesn't kill them. Your Cone of Frost, your Frost Armor, and finally your Blizzard ability. So Blizzard is channeled, so you can kind of move it as you go along. It deals a decent amount of damage, so it's definitely a good spell to have. Alright, so our next spell book we're going to use is the Tome of Fire. The Tome of Fire is also from the Wizards RPG series, and it's your Fire Mage spell book. Primary spell being Fireball, which launches an explosive fireball. It does deal AoE damage. Fire Breath, which incinerates targets in front of you. It's a cone-based spell. Fire Missiles shoots a barrage of homing missiles. And Meteor, which crashes a meteor down onto the target. AoE-based. And then finally Wall of Flames, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's AoE and it's continuous damage. So the Fire Mage is actually the spellbook we showcased in my Fire Mage 101 series, but we'll do it a little bit here as well. So that's your Cone of Fire. I am staying in creative for this just because, you know, I don't have all the fire runes, things like that. Just makes it easier to demonstrate these spells. But the damage that you're seeing, the damage output is basically what the damage output is. So here's Meteor. Meteor, like Blizzard, just a great AoE spell. And then that is your Wall of Fire. It's a pretty useful spell as well. A lot of AoE in the Fire Mage. Overall, the Fire Mage has a very similar playstyle to the Frost Mage. Next up is going to be the Arcane Mage. The Arcane Mage uses the Tome of Arcane. Who would have thought? And primary spell is Arcane Missiles, which shoots some energy bolts piercing through some targets. Arcane Blast, which blasts a single target for arcane damage, which also grants you Arcane Charge stacking. Force Push, which pushes your target away from you, making it levitate for an instant. Arcane Beam, which channels a beam of arcane energy, dealing damage per second, and also consumes your arcane charges. And then finally Blink, which is a nice little teleport ability. It's a little bit of a unique spell for the Arcane Mage. It's a little something, you know, it does play a little differently than the other two. So your little arcane missiles or bolts or whatever. Not super damaging, but casts pretty quick. Does what it needs to do. So the next thing is your Arcane Blast, which you can see puts little charges orbiting me. Here's the push, which is kind of cool because it blasts him away, almost like a force push kind of thing. And then one of my favorites is always these beam-like abilities. It reminds me, if you've played the Holy Cleric, he has like a beam-like ability like that. I just think they're fun to play with. And then finally your Blink ability. So I would say of the three major spell books, the damage on this is a little bit lighter just because you don't have the AoE potential that you do for the other ones. But still a fun class to play, or a fun spell book to use. Next up is your Runic Invocations spellbook. This is from the Invocations mod. It doesn't really have a whole lot of equipment that comes with it, so I had a hard time picking out something to use it with. I initially was trying to use it with the Starforge because it gives plus to all all three of the stats. However, it overrides the spells that you would be using, so not exactly something I have an optimal way to use, but it basically has a primary spell, which is a spell that you cast based on how many arcane charges you have, or arcane power or frost power, like essentially charges that you get from the other three spells. So you have an arcane, a frost, and a fire spell, Gon, Heo, and Ra. They're not overly powerful, but they charge up, and each one gives you a rune as you use it. So I'll use my frost spell, and you can see I get the little runes at that point. It doesn't do a ton of damage, but then when I use my primary ability, I'm sorry, that was the arcane one, it does deliver like a charged up kind of thing. The frost is interesting because it makes like a chunk of ice. And then when you execute that one, it's like a big frost nova, which is kind of useful, kind of cool. And depending on how many charges you have, it does something different. So definitely worth playing around with, as everything you do, depending on how many charges you have, every time you cast that primary ability, it's going to do something different. So this is definitely not as straightforward as a lot of the other ones. But still might be fun to use if that's what you're into. So next up is all the different spell blades. This is a pretty hefty category. Each spell blade element has 2 different spell books for a total of 6 spell books that would go with the spell blades mod. So we'll start off with the Frost spell books, and the first of which is the Death Chill Tome. Death Chill Tome has your primary spell is Winter's Grasp, which chills your target with Frozen Grasp, dealing some damage. It has a passive Death Chill Brand, which makes you chill faster and heat up slower. Inflicts chilling on your target, and which deals frost damage every half second. There's a Frost Bloom Cascade, which you perform a nova around you, dealing AoE up to 6 blocks away, and it chains from enemies it hits. And then you can inflict Mass Hypothermia, which puts max chill on all your enemies, as well as a death chill on nearby enemies, dealing frost damage every half second. And enemies with death chill already on them would refresh any instance of their debuff at double the effectiveness. This is one of the, I believe, newer tomes. Back when I did my 101 guide, I believe there was only 3 Spellblade tomes at the time. So that's your basic Winter's Grasp. Doesn't seem super powerful. your Death Chill brand, which seems to make him just pulse, you know, with frost energy periodically, slowly killing them. Next up is your Frost Bloom Cascade, which is your AoE. That one, that's pretty cool actually. I don't know what it actually did, but it makes that chain reaction of everybody kind of bursting. Very cool. I'm sure if I was more optimized with my frost damage, these spells would be doing a lot more too. You put this on a Necromancer who has jacked up frost power. And then finally our last spell of Mass Hypothermia. Another AoE which inflicts that pulsing frost on all the enemies on the screen. So the other Frost spellbook is your more basic Frost Techniques spellbook. It has a Frost Overdrive, which is your primary and damages an area around you. Your Riptide, which does exactly what the Trident version of it does. You aim it and launch yourself as if you had a Riptide Enchanted Trident. Massacre, you become intangible and attack the nearest enemy 5 times over, dealing a bunch of damage. And if it kills the enemy, you continue on to another. And then Blade Flurry, where you just swing your weapon wildly, shooting, bouncing, and ricocheting blade projectiles. So that's just your basic Frost Overdrive here. Little AoE, not terrible. Next up is your Riptide, which definitely works just like the Trident version. Cool little movement ability. Get some pretty decent height on it too. That would probably be really useful with an Elytra. You could just launch right into the air. After that is Massacre. I'd like to see that with a couple more enemies around. And then finally your Blade Flurry. So next up is our fire techniques. A lot of the techniques books are going to have some similar things, but Flame Overdrive, which deals flame damage in an area around you. Dragon Slam performs a fiery slam, first launching yourself in the air and dealing damage in an area around you. Flaming Laceration, it swings your weapon wildly, shooting flaming projectiles, and then Flickering Flame, you jump onto nearby enemies, equally dealing damage, both physical and fire. It will also focus on only one target if there's only one target. So much like our Frost, it's just the primary ability is just that general little AoE. And then there's the movement kind of based ability. It's a little more difficult to use than the Frost Riptide kind of one. If you're already on the ground, it just pummels the ground and kind of deals like an AoE kind of thing. But if you're in the air, it'll do this little rolling kind of death spin until you hit the ground. Next up is our Flaming Laceration. Again, these all kind of mimic each other, much like the Frost thing. And then finally, our final ability, which just kind of projects us. That's the one that will bounce us. We'll get it when we have a bunch of people around, and it'll bounce us in between them. The other spell book we have available to us for a fire spellblade is the Phoenix Rites book. You can shoot a flame lance in front of you. You have a Phoenix Curse, which is like a passive, and then it makes it so your damage sets enemies on fire and gives them that curse, dealing damage over time. Basically counts as burning, but then you can activate it to deal additional fire damage to nearby enemies. Phoenix Dive, where you blink towards the target, performing a Nova and landing, setting everybody on fire. And then Wildfire, which sets everything on fire around you. So that is definitely cool ability. Like they're on fire, they're pulsing with fire. So again, that was Flame Lance. Pretty effective. And there's the Phoenix Curse. So that's when you activate it. Up next we have our Phoenix Dive. A lot of them have that similar burning effect. That's interesting. I wonder how far away I can use that from. It's decent range on it. And then our last one is the Wildfire ability. That was anticlimactic. The Wildfire ability. Okay, so the Wildfire ability has to be used on enemies that are actually burning. And then it just kind of makes them combust. Next up is our Arcane techniques for our Arcane Spellblade. Very similar abilities. It has, you know, its standard shoot stuff in an area around you. Your second ability is your movement-based ability. In this case, it teleports you behind an enemy. Your third ability is your swing your weapon wildly, shooting projectiles ability. And then your last one is your kind of AoE, like, I don't know, like final ability type of thing. In this case, it teleports you behind your last enemy, dealing damage to all of them in a line. So, much like all the other ones, just with a different color scheme. And this is your, like, flicker kind of ability. It's a little lackluster. You swing your weapon wildly. Gotta be in range of somebody, but a little lackluster as well. Not a huge fan of the generic Spellblade books. And then that's the one that teleports you in a line, dealing damage to the final enemy. So your last one is this Echoes Unleashed. I've never actually used this spellbook before. Starfall, which drops 4 small amethyst meteors on a target. Runic Echoes / Collapse. It's a passive where you gain a stack of Unleash every 4 seconds, and your spells repeat an amount equal to your Unleash stacks. And then you can activate it to place a stack of Collapse on an enemy, dealing damage to them after 2 seconds. Then you have Echo Storm. It creates a vortex which homes on your target, dealing some damage. And then Reverberating Ray fires a blast in the direction of your target, dealing damage to everything in a line. So it looks like there is some similarity with that fire one. Oh, that's pretty decent. So that was the Collapse. Really nothing crazy. The Amethyst Shards one is okay. Oh, that's the Vortex. So I didn't select a target, so I guess it's not going to home. But if I select a target, it will go out towards him, dealing damage. It's like a little Arcane Tornado, I guess. And what's the final ability? Almost reminds me like the Warden kind of blast. A lot of cool looking stuff. I don't know how effective it really is, but I'm personally a much bigger fan of the stuff with the quick release AoE spells, as a lot of the other stuff becomes cumbersome to use. Maybe if I key mapped it better. And that wraps it up for Spellblades. Okay, so the next spells that we're going to cover are what I'm calling the off-element spells. So these are still elemental spells, but they're not from your normal fire, ice, or fire, frost, and arcane. So they don't get same amount of synergy that you get from the regular skill tree, and are generally going to be a little bit weaker. But you know, if you were playing the spell book in a mod pack that things didn't get so overpowered in, I mean, it would still be just fine. So I think these are all from the Elemental Wizards RPG class mod, and there's 3 of them. There's Earth, there's Air, and there's Water. So we'll start off with Water, and you have a Water Whip where you can deal water damage and soak the target. I don't really know what soaking the target does. You can have a Bubble Beam, which spawns small bubbles, dealing water damage. Also can protect your friends. Spring Water, which summons a water spring, healing and cleansing, but also dealing damage. And then Hydro Beam, which channels a high pressure beam, dealing damage per second. So Hydro Beam is probably the one which is the most similar to that arcane kind of beam that we were using earlier. So here's your Water Whip. And then your little bubble thing. The spring one. And then the bubble beam. Or the hydro beam. We'll get another hydro beam in there. So your next spellbook's going to be the Mountain Peak Journal, which is your stone kind of spellbook. Your first spell being a Stone Spear, which throws a projectile, inflicting bleeding and exploding on contact with nearby targets. Stone Flesh, which increases your armor and toughness, and if you have full hearts, it will deal, the next attack deals half damage against you. Terra Circle, which spawns 2 dripstone circles around you, dealing damage and adding bleeding. And then finally Earthquake, which deals AoE earth spell damage, throwing targets around and adding a trembling effect. There's your little Stone Spear. Oh, the dripstone circle thing's pretty cool. Oh, look at that. Okay. Let's check out the Earthquake in the meantime. Oh, so the Earthquake appears to be channeled. Get a couple of these guys to spawn. Yeah, so the Earthquake is channeled. You can slowly move, and it has a pretty decent range. And then the spike thing is just cool looking. And also a pretty decent range. And because this is like off elemental, like I'm not necessarily optimized in spell power, but I'm gonna double check in survival, but it seems to be dealing pretty decent damage. Yeah, look at the range on that. That is crazy range for an AoE spell. Alright, so your final of the, what I'm calling off-element skill books is the Song of Winds, and this is your air spell book. Your primary is Air Cutter, which deals a constant air spell damage in a small area. Secondary is Arrow Blast, which deals air damage and knocks the target up. Your third is Updraft, which damages the target constantly, while dealing more damage when the target is in the air. So maybe a possible combo with Arrow Blast there. And then finally Tornado, which knocks enemies up and then sucks them into the tornado. So here's your primary. Looks like it does knock them around. And then here would be the Arrow Blast. Oh, that is pretty cool. So let's try Arrow Blast into Updraft. Interesting. And then Tornado. So as far as usability, the Earth one has by far been the strongest that I've seen. The AoE in the air and the water is not great. I would say The water at least had the beam thing, which you could, like, sweep across a group of people. And the range on the tornado doesn't appear that great. I mean, I guess continuing on our spell path, we'll go over to the holy spells. If you've seen my Cleric or Crusader 101 series, this will kind of be familiar to you. So the holy spells, you have two spell books available. Your holy book, which is your priest kind of spell book, and your paladin librarian, which is obviously your paladin spell book. I'll demo both of these under the same gear set just because they both scale off of healing power, and the paladin's equipment doesn't necessarily lend to the best of healing power attributes, but it's also not something that you're typically using as your primary method of attack. So for the Holy Book, you have Holy Shock as your primary spell, which also can heal you if you don't have an enemy targeted. Holy Light, which is your beam of light, which you can sweep across enemies, dealing damage per second. Circle of Healing, which heals you and people around you. Holy Rain, which calls down holy energy in an area, healing and damaging. And then a Barrier, which prevents damage from being taken within that barrier. So just your basic little attack, decent enough damage. The set that I'm using, by the way, is from Sorcerer's Supplements, and it has 35% healing power, which is actually better than the prior Vestments or Priest Vestments, which you find in the Priests and Paladins mod pack. So that was your primary. Pretty simple, pretty basic. Then your beam, this is probably my favorite of the spells. It's just cool looking. Has decent range too. And you'll see a common theme is, like, I do not have optimized gear. I didn't even switch my spells, my talents to support healing as a spell power. When you're against level 1 enemies, like, if you don't stray far from your starter area, any class in this mod pack has the potential to do a ton of damage. So then here's your healing circle. It's not really something I can demo effectively, but it's there. Your Holy Rain, this does do AoE damage as well as heal you. And that's the one thing about this guy, is a lot of your abilities, although they're slightly less damaging than some of the other classes, they heal you while they're damaging, which is nice. And that was finally the the protective barrier, where we'll go into survival. Right, so I can place down this healing thing, and really they can't do too much to me. Put the barrier down, they're not doing anything to me at all. The only problem is, like I said, I don't equip myself with all the runes, so I don't have the spell power to do a lot of the stuff. The Holy Rain, definitely a good little AoE spell, also heals me. I look like a pincushion as usual. So that was your Priest spell book, or your Holy spell book. And now for the Paladin Librarian. This one doesn't have a whole lot of spells that you're really using against enemies. It has Flash Heal, which only heals me as my primary. You can shoot a Stone Fist, dealing damage to enemies in an area. Divine Protection, which makes you invulnerable for a little bit. Judgment strikes your target enemies around it. And then Battle Banner, which increases your attack speed and knockback resistance. So we'll just use the Stone Fist. It's kind of hard to demo some of the other ones. So you'll see it shoots the little Stone Fist kind of projectile out of it. Flash Heal is just exactly what it says. It heals me. There's my Divine Shield. So you can see it put those little shields around me, making me invulnerable. Judgment kind of is like a, I don't know what to call it, a projectile coming down from the sky. Deals a little bit of AoE. And then finally the Battle Banner. But this class is much more of supposedly a melee-based class, so these are just support level abilities. And if you want to see what a broken holy hammer looks like, you'll never get that in normal survival gameplay. It's just you can use the malevolent manuscript or whatever manuscript in creative mode to give yourself an insane amount of skill points in the ascendancy tree. Okay, so on to the Druid skills. The Druid has 2 different skill books, and both of them come from the Druids of the Storm and Spirit mod pack. So the first one we're going to demonstrate is the Ethereal Spellbook. First ability is Spirit Bolts, and your Druid skills deal like a combination of different damage. They actually pair well with the Necromancer, weirdly enough, because the Necromancer, you can get the Soul Shock ability, so your frost and your soul damage can get pretty high, and it also increases your lightning damage, all of which are damage types that the Druid can benefit from. So with the Ethereal Spellbook, you have Spirit Bolts, which is soul, frost, and fire damage, and it just sends an elemental mote hurling forward many times a second. Maelstrom Totem, which is also a combination of elemental damage, dealing damage 4 times a second. Effigy of the Everlasting Maelstrom is conjured at a spot of your location, submitting the area to the elements. Soulfire Bastion, which is a buff, kind of toggled buff spell. And then Soul Flare, which deals soul damage 2 times a second. And it says adversaries on the receiving end of the spell have been reported to never return, having been sent hurling miles away. This is another class I've never honestly used, so let's check it out. Okay, so that's actually my staff's ability. Some kind of a lightning bolt. That's pretty cool. Wow. So here's that little mote thing. So here's Spirit Bolts. I'll sleep just so we have some light for this. Spirit Bolts is a decent range, little channeled ability. Maelstrom Totem. Interesting. You can make a bunch of them. Soulfire Bastion is the buff kind of ability, and you can toggle back and forth between 2 different variants of it. Not really sure what it's doing. Cleansing Fire. Or Eternal Youth. And then finally your Soul Flare ability. It seemed lackluster. Certainly doesn't appear to make people go away and disappear forever. So your other spellbook is the Soul Volt spellbook. Soul Volt spellbook actually comes with Soul Smite as its primary. You then have Voltaic Burst, which allows the user to lay waste to wherever they walk, getting stronger as they continue to cast the spell. Galvanic Contagion uses unstable energy, quickly bounces between targets, spreading like a plague. And then finally, you can summon a Storm, which deals damage 4 times a second with Storm Call. So Voltaic Burst. As I walk around, it deals damage. The Galvanic Contagion, which is this spreading kind of damage dealing thing. However, the tooltip image on it looks like it's corrupted or doesn't work. And then finally Storm Call. Basically Just a mass AoE spell. Looks like it messes up everything in the area. It'll last a pretty decent amount of time, too. And I would guess if I was optimized for like lightning and soul damage, if I spec'd as a necromancer, this spellbook would be doing a pretty decent amount of damage. The next set of spellbooks is our Death Knight spellbooks. And like your off-elemental spellbooks, because they're not elements that are found in the actual like normal skill tree, it's harder to scale them outside of the Frost book. The Frost spellbook you can scale with, obviously, with Frost, but the Unholy and the Blood, there's no other ways to get that type of spell power outside of stuff that comes with that very specific mod. So I don't find that these scale as well, but we'll demonstrate them all the same. So the first spellbook we'll look at is the Tome of Unholy Teachings. Your primary ability being Festering Strike, where you deal Festering attack, dealing both physical and unholy damage, and applying 2 stacks of some kind of a random disease to the target. And your next one is Death Coil. You unleash a coil of death, dealing damage to the target, and if it's affected by a disease, it will explode up to 4 stacks and reapply a single stack to a nearby non-infected target. Epidemic, it explodes up to 2 stacks of an active disease on all nearby targets and deals unholy damage per stack. And then finally, Death Grip, it grips the target with the power of death, pulling them towards you and giving them slowness. So, Festering Strike, and this, a lot of this is partial physical and partial unholy damage. So, you know, maybe it behooves you to set up a melee-based character here. Here's your Death Coil. So, Festering Strike, Death Coil, Epidemic. And the guy who we hit with the Festering Strike does look like he was affected, but other than that, I didn't see Epidemic doing too much. And finally, your Death Grip, which, I mean, as far as I can tell, doesn't appear to do anything. So, somewhat of a lackluster spellbook. The next one we'll cover is the Tome of Vampiric Knowledge. The Tome of Vampiric Knowledge, you can deal a Death Strike, which strikes your target with a powerful attack, physical damage, healing 10% of your health, and giving you absorption if you are already at full health. Morrowind, which rends the target, dealing physical and blood damage, and applies 3 stack of resistance to the caster. Blood Boil, which boils all the blood of the enemies within 8 blocks, dealing damage and applying a Blood Plague, which deals damage per second. And then Dark Command, which forces the target to attack you and enrages it. Again, this seems like a very melee-based as well, so possibly rolling more of a melee than a spell-based character if you're going pure Death Knight is probably your best bet. So we'll start off with the Death Strike. Next ability is your Morrowind, or something like that. Not really sure what it's doing, to be honest. Honestly, it looks to be, it's glitching. I'm hitting the button, but then it keeps trying to trigger my primary, so. And Blood Boil. And then finally your Dark Command. So he's going to start attacking me. Even though I'm in creative, it does enrage him. Does this work in not creative? So it may have had an issue with me being in creative, but there's your Blood Boil. I still can't really tell what this secondary attack is really doing, but it does at least trigger. Your final book is the Tome of Eternal Winter. For those of you who are familiar with my fantasy Minecraft guide, this is the one my Necromancer was using for a while, mostly because I really like the Remorseless Winter spell. But your primary spell is Obliterate. It deals frost damage and applies freezing, and extends the duration of your Remorseless Winter and Agonizing Breath. Then you have Frost Strike, which infuses your Rune Blade with frost, dealing frost damage and physical damage. And if the victim is frozen, icicles will be thrown at all nearby enemies. Remorseless Winter, surround yourself in a Remorseless Winter, dealing constant frost damage to all enemies within 8 blocks every half a second, and a small chance to freeze them. And then Agonizing Breath deals a cone of frost and high frost damage to all targets in front of you, and if nobody's hit, the breath will stop. So just the Remorseless Winter spell is a nice little AoE. It follows you around, you don't have to channel it. I find it to be a very useful spell. I used it a lot on my Necromancer, who has a ton of stacking frost damage to make his minions more powerful. So that spell alone, I think, makes this spell book one of my favorites. But the other spells, here's your Obliterate, just kind of a standard looking melee attack. Here is a Frost Strike. Oh, I'm stuck in the mud. Yeah, I'm gonna have to take myself out of creative again. It's interesting that some of these abilities don't like creative for this spellbook. So here's your Frost Strike. Trying to demonstrate this Agonizing Breath, but it's just not working. It works. I use it on my Necromancer, so I don't know what's going on with it. Oh well. It's not the greatest spell anyway. It's really this one. The Remorseless Winter is your main reason to use the spellbook, if you ask me. Moving on. So moving our way towards some of the melee classes, the Witcher is the next one that we'll cover. And the Witcher has 2 spell books, one of which is your sign manual and one of which is the Witcher Techniques. The Witcher Techniques is kind of your melee abilities. You have Witcher Reflexes, which blocks attacks and arrows for a short time, Battle Trance, which gains movement speed, and deal 10% more melee damage for each Adrenaline amplifier. Whirl, where you spin and deal physical damage. With the more Adrenaline you have, the faster you move. And Rend, which is a heavy strike, dealing physical damage and scales with Adrenaline. I'm guessing you can get, you get Adrenaline through your gear, but I'm not really sure how that Adrenaline stuff is tracked. But either way, it looks like something we should probably demo in Survival. So that's just a primary attack. And this one's supposed to like block arrows and attacks, I guess. Hard to tell what it's doing. Honestly, these are there's your spinning one. Kind of hard to demo these things. So here's the spinning one again. And your heavy strike. Okay, so it does like kind of pull back and then swing and strike. So Battle Trance, you use it. Yeah, it gains a little bit of movement speed. Your straight up melee attack is just far more effective to use. Even the range on the AoE isn't great. So let's check out the signs. It's unfortunate you can't use kind of like both together because, you know, in the Witcher games, like you have obviously access to both your abilities and your signs at the same time. So the signs, you have a bunch of options. Your Ard, which is a telekinetic thrust. Axii makes the target incapacitated more vulnerable. Igni, which is your pyrokinetic burst. Quen gives you absorption and clears all your negative status effects. Yarden slows enemies for 10 seconds. And then an alternate sign mode, which gives you the access to alternate Witcher signs for 30 seconds. So in the alternate sign mode, you can then get Ard Sweep, which is telekinetic thrust. Axii Puppet makes a hostile monster your ally. Igni Fire Stream. Quen Active Shield, so it kind of like increases, it looks like, the abilities of the original the original abilities. Here's your Igni. Cooldown on these things is a decent amount too. Here's kind of your push one. Let's try this one. Is supposed to trap the undead guys. Push one's pretty cool. All the other ones. Whoops. Switch into the other mode. Again, your kind of general melee ability is just going to kill things much more effectively. So that's your Igni stream. And then once you use the alternate sign, it looks like it reverts back to the regular sign, so you would have to cast that ability again to get the alternate sign again. Alright, so the next thing we'll talk about is your different warrior spellbooks. You have 3 general options: the Juggernaut's Techniques, which comes from the Clean Arsenal mod, the Ancient Rune Tome, which comes from the Berserker class mod, and the Warriors Codex, which comes from the Rogues and Warriors RPG series mod. So in the Juggernaut's Techniques, your basic ability is a Valiant Strike, where you strike the enemy for damage, gaining stacks of Valiant, which gives you damage regenerated over the next 4 seconds. Then you have Whirling Slam, which gives you a channel. You channel to pummel nearby enemies for a bunch of damage per second. Cataclysm, where you slam the ground, causing an explosion with strength, and dealing more explosions, with the last one having extra strength depending on your channel time. Damages all entities in the area. And then Tremor Walk, which makes for the next 10 seconds you sunder the ground as you walk, dealing damage to enemies nearby. So that's your Valiant Strike. Just a general melee attack. Next one is your Whirling Slam, where you'll notice it kind of does 2 general whirls and then slams down on the ground around. Decent damage. Next one is your Cataclysm, and this one takes a long charge up time, but then slams down onto the ground, creating these explosions, dealing everything in the area. And finally your Tremor Walk, which is just a pulsing AoE. This one is kind of like the Remorseless Winter spell that we used. A very good AoE because you can just kind of cast it and forget about it for a little bit as you walk through enemies, dealing damage. Overall, this is a pretty good spell book. I enjoy it a lot. The abilities deal a decent amount of damage, and it's good for AoE clearing. Next one is your Ancient Rune Tome, which is from the Berserker mod. First ability, Wild Rage, which fears a target and gives you the rage effect. Second ability is Blood Reckoning, dealing damage around you and converting absorption to health, which also increases your rage duration. Bloody Strike, it deals physical damage and trait of self-damage, and gives you absorption for damage that you deal. And then finally Outrage, slashes wildly, dealing physical damage and clearing your negative buffs and extending your rage duration. So the one thing about the Berserker class mod is there's this rage effect. If you notice on these raid axes, it gives additional rage power, and you can use this to your advantage when using this mod. But in just covering the spellbook, we're not going to really talk too much about that type of stuff. So your primary is your Wild Rage, which fears him and gives me that rage kind of effect. Secondary is the Blood Reckoning, which deals a little bit of damage to enemies nearby. And then your Bloody Strike. And then finally your Outrage, which slashes wildly. I mean, to me, this ability book is a little bit lackluster. It's not something I've ever found myself wanting to use. But maybe if you paid more attention to the rage mechanic, it might be something that you use more of. Final spellbook is our Warriors Codex. This is your rogues and warriors. This is very reminiscent of like a World of Warcraft warrior spellbook. You have Shattering Throw. Throw your weapon at the target, dealing damage and reducing their armor. Demoralizing Shout. You can shout at nearby enemies, reducing their damage and dealing a small amount of damage. Charge, which increases your move back speed and knockback resistance, frees you from movement impairing effects. And then Whirlwind, which you can hold to spin around, dealing damage to nearby enemies. This is kind of your weapon throw here. You do have to hold it down and charge it for a second. Then your Demoralizing Shout. Charge, which increases your speed there. It's not like the World of Warcraft charge where it's a targeted ability per se. And then your main damaging ability in this book is the Whirlwind, which is actually a decent AoE ability. And you can hold it down for a pretty decent amount of time. And maybe we can, while we wait for it to recharge, we'll group a couple of these guys up, go into survival, and kind of demo that ability in a group of enemies. Here we go. So it does shred through these guys when they're clumped together pretty well. You could pair it with the Whirlwind kind of like Ascendancy ability and just be a massive whirlwinding barbarian of doom. So that's it for the warrior abilities. Overall, I'm a fan of the Juggernaut's techniques from the Clean Arsenal mod for what I use when I play the warrior, but obviously there's a lot of personal preference in there. I just prefer that one because it is the simplest AoE and I think the best, you know, as far as damaging abilities that you can use. And just cool looking abilities. So the next one we'll cover is like the Forcemaster. This is from the Forcemaster class mod pack. Correction, from the Forcemaster class mod. And this has nothing to do, despite my disappointment, as to being a Jedi. So the book that they have is Force Mastery. Your primary spell, I'm not even going to bother trying to pronounce, makes your target vulnerable to arcane damage and weakens its damage and higher crit chance. Stone Hand gives you a Stone Hand effect and then chance to stun targets on knuckle attacks. Burst Crack, which smashes the ground, dealing 11 physical damage and knocks your targets up. And then another unpronounceable word is Concentrated Strikes and exhaust the caster. I haven't played this, but the descriptions sound lackluster to me. And you're using these Eternium Knuckles, which give to arcane spell power, so maybe that's kind of what you want to scale there. It's your regular punch. Ugh. Punch you in your face. And straight punch. Okay, it's just like a regular punch. Let's check out Stone Hand. I guess that just kind of gives me a buff. Okay, so that just buffs you so you can kind of cast it, and then I guess maybe it increases your damage. It seems like some Stone Hands drop every once in a while. That primary ability that I can't pronounce. Nothing spectacular. Let's try out Burst Crack here. Try that again with some more enemies nearby. Okay, it's not terrible. And then the last one that I can't pronounce. Well, I don't imagine I'd find myself using this. Right, next up, we'll test out the rogue kind of class spell books. Your two choices are the Rogue Handbook or your Trickster's Book of Shadows. So the Rogue Handbook is your basic one that comes with the Rogues and Warriors RPG series mod, and then your Trickster's Book of Shadows comes from the Clean Arsenal mod. So the Rogue Handbook, your primary ability is Slice and Dice, where you enter a battle trance during which your attacks grant extra attack power, and it stacks up to 10 times. Then you have Shock Powder, which stuns nearby enemies. Shadow Step lets you appear behind your target, and Vanish, where you vanish from sight, entering stealth for 8 seconds. Much like the World of Warcraft Rogue. So Slice and Dice is probably one of the better abilities. It doesn't necessarily have, glamorous looking effects, but its stacking buff stacked on top of other, damage bonuses and things like that can give you pretty insanely high DPS. So we'll go around, and that's Slice and Dice. Just, you can attack pretty quickly and stack it up. And then you can get pretty high uptime on it because its cooldown is 10 seconds and its duration is 10 seconds, I believe. I'm sorry, cooldown is 12.5 and duration is 10. So you can keep it up most of the time, which if you're on boss fights and such, is the best way to handle it. Your Stun Powder, just stun some dudes, nothing crazy. Your Shadow Step. I might need to go into survival to use that. Oh, I don't know why the Shadow Step isn't working. Maybe somebody can tell me in the comments. But there's your Vanish. Everything else works. I don't know why Shadow Step doesn't. As their instruments trying to get me copyright struck. Alright, your other rogue spellbook is your Trickster's Book of Shadows. You have a Flourish where you spin rapidly, dealing damage to nearby enemies. A Riposte or something along those lines, can't pronounce that word. While casting this spell, you're immune to an attack and you essentially parry it. Tactical roll, you roll forward and then cleave around you, and then Shade Walk, and as you walk around you leave behind shade and smoke, which repeat your Flourish ability on top of them. Flourish ability, nice little spin attack. Decent short range little AoE. Decent cooldown. Then your Riposte thing. Really, you're just waiting to be attacked. And then you do that little kind of thing. Tactical roll. Between that and your regular roll, you can get some roly-poly going on. Kind of hard to judge when you're going to come out of the roll. And then your Shade Walk. And they all duplicate whenever you do your Flourish. It's kind of a cool little effect. And that about wraps it up for the Rogue. So our next and final class to talk about is going to be the Archer. And you actually have 4 spell books now for the Archers. You have the one from the Archer RPG series, and then 3 different spell books from the Archer expansion. So we'll cover the Archer RPG series first. You have your primary ability being a Power Shot, which inflicts your target with Hunter's Mark and increase the damage taken, which can stack. You have Entangling Roots, which conjures roots up from the ground, slowing enemies in the area. Barrage fires multiple arrows in quick succession. Arrow Rain, which unleashes a volley of arrows raining down in an area. And Magical Arrow, which pierces through enemies in its path. Alright, let's do this. I like staying in first person for the archer. Targeting is a little easier for me. Well, it doesn't seem to be doing the power shot. Not really sure why. It is what it is. There's your entangling roots. Here's your kind of rapid fire. Your arrow rain. And then your elemental arrow. And these do work with crossbows as well. It's a pretty basic, versatile skill book. Has a little AoE, rapid fire, you know, some movement and parrying abilities. The next one we'll cover is Tundric Hunting. This one is kind of a frost-based arrow book. You have Frozen Shot, which I don't know if we're going to be able to use any of these primary spells. I don't know why they're not working. Stacks the frosted effect on the target for 5 seconds. That's actually, it looks like a passive, so maybe it just automatically makes your thing frozen. We'll find out. Arctic Volley shoots 8 Arctic arrows that deal damage and frosts the target. Frozen Pact, which damages according to their frozen ticks and reduces their attack for 5 seconds. And then Enchanted Crystal Arrow, which deals damage, stuns, and freezes. I can't really tell if it's activating or not, but... that was your Crystal Arrow. We'll try out the Arctic Volley. And the AoE one. None of these seem particularly great. So that was your Tundric Hunting. Next up is Bounty List. Your primary is a fast shot, which increases your range, haste, and movement speed. Secondary is a trick shot, which is a bouncing arrow. Then you have disabling shot, where you jump back after hitting a target. And then choking gas, which creates a poisonous cloud on contact. Oh yeah, it is working. So it's like a passive ability because my movement speed is getting increased. So let's see if we can get this trick shot going on next time somebody spawns. Also, just the archer in general with the agile ability just runs super fast. There we go. So we'll try out the trick shot. I don't know what that did. Oh, that was the disengage kind of one. I don't know, trick shot's not impressing me. Let's check out the poison one. Well, poison cloud's pretty decent in size. And then disengage, which makes me leap backwards. Not bad. Alright. On to the last one. So the last one is War Archery Instructions. And this is looks like maybe more of a fire-based one. Really just the first one, but your first one is Smoldering Arrow, which is your passive. And it creates a small explosion of the target, damaging and burning. Then you have Dual Shot, which fires 2 arrows at once. Point Blank Shot, which deals extra damage and knocks the target back more the closer they are to you. And then finally Pin Down, which creates it so the target can't move or jump for 4 seconds. Definitely seems like something that's targeted at people playing like a PvP kind of version, if you will. Ooh. This is probably the most useful of these passive abilities yet. Definitely looks the coolest. It's hard to tell how big the AoE range is. Let's try the twin shot. I think I missed. So not quite the same spread as multi-shot gets you. Oh, the point blank shot, so let's get up close, see how far it knocks him back. Well, he dies, so it doesn't really do anything. And then the pin down. I would say your primary ability is your most useful one here. Probably the traditional spell book is your most versatile, but then the other ones are more niche kind of uses. Well, so there you have it. Every spell book in the mod pack, at least as of 2.99. There are a couple more versions that have come out since then, and may have additional spell books. I'll maybe cover those in the future, but as of now I'm not upgrading because I know there were a lot of issues people were having with not being able to get in and out of the nether. So if I update in the future, we'll make a little addendum to this with any new spell books that get added, and I'll try to cover them maybe in shorts or something periodically from here on out. But for now, that was it. Every spell book in the game. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if there's any other kind of content you want to see in the Fantasy Minecraft mod pack. This video was a suggestion from somebody that wanted to have an overview of all the spell books, so I'm more than happy to take those suggestions and make videos for people. So again, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed it, a like and subscribe would be appreciated, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Oh, one of these little elemental guys. Yeah. I like how these guys just follow you around like they're the mob trying to shake you down. It seems there's a war. Shooting at me, I'm in creative. And the Magisters are winning.